Good evening, everybody, and a big warm welcome to the Soul Miracles Live today on 8th of September 2022. We are very excited and delighted to bring to you someone very famous in the space of between life regressions. He is a hypnotist and has done extensive work in this session. So thanks for joining, and we'll get started. You know that we work at Soul Miracles, we work with the dimension of the soul. Healing happens in many ways. It happens at the level of the body, it happens at the level of the mind. But at Soul Miracles, we talk and discuss modalities around healing from the soul. And the extensive work that I have done in Akashic Records and automatic writing, especially as a teacher, when I talk about pre-birth contracts and pre-birth plan to all my students, little did I know that the series that we were discussing around how a soul plans its birth and how a soul plans its lessons that it's meant to learn in this birth. And I would often refer to Rob's book as the study material, saying that let's go with this. Little did we know that we would have him here with us live. And as we have him here. Waiting for him to join. For those of you who have not read his book, we are going to be talking about that. We are trying to add him. Hi Rob, how are you?
Hi Mami, how are you?
Good, I'm doing well. Is everybody able to hear Rob? Please do let us know. Rob, we are very excited to have you here with us, and so is our audience.
Thank you, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Lovely. So just to introduce him formally, he's a hypnotist who offers between lives soul regressions. He helps people heal and understand their life plans. His book, The Soul's Plan, has been an inspiration for many people in the world to understand how a pre-birth plan shapes up the entire destiny of a human being before they take birth. The book talks a lot about examples of people who have understood and gone through tough lives, and they have understood their soul plan and how they have worked through it. In a sense, it's what we call a gift of crisis. So Rob, welcome, and we'll get started. The audience has been waiting to hear from you, and we have a couple of questions. So let's get right into it. So Rob, what was, if you can share with the audience, what was your spiritual awakening around which you wrote this book and you understood more about the pre-birth plan?
Well, there were three very important things that happened in my life back in mid-2003. The first was that I had my first session ever with a medium, and she channeled my spirit guides, and they introduced me to the concept of pre-birth planning, which was completely new to me at the time. And then shortly thereafter, I was introduced to a woman who has the ability to channel her higher self, her soul. And I had the opportunity to spend about 15 hours talking with her higher self about how pre-birth planning works. And it was explained to me in great detail. And then really the most significant experience was also right around that time. And I was doing nothing more than walking down the sidewalk in the middle of the afternoon. And I had a spiritually transformative experience in which every time I looked at another person, this feeling of pure, overwhelming, unconditional love for that person would wash over me. And this was really a transcendent kind of love, a divine love. And I understood as this was happening what the message was, which was I was being caused to know that we as souls are made literally from the energy of unconditional love. And the reason that happened is that when I researched many people's pre-birth plans for my books, what I found was that every plan is based on complete unconditional love for every person involved. Even when great challenges are being planned, even when negative roles are being scripted, it's always based on complete unconditional love for every person involved. And then I realized, oh yes, that experience that I had walking down the street that day, that was gifted to me so that when I found this result in my research, I would know with absolute certainty that it was correct.
Beautiful, beautiful. And from there, you decided to do a series of books and, expanding the consciousness and the awareness even more.
Yeah, and I should explain for your audience how I researched people's pre-birth plans. In the first two books, Your Soul's Plan and Your Soul's Gift, it was entirely through sessions with mediums and channels who in one way or another could access this kind of information. Now, in the new book, Your Soul's Love, there are also still sessions with the mediums and channels, but in that book, I've incorporated the form of hypnosis I practice, which is called a between lives soul regression. In that kind of hypnosis, the client speaks to spirit directly and asks their council of elders, the beings who oversee their personal evolution, any questions they have about their life. So the main questions most people will ask are, what did I plan? Why did I make those plans? How am I doing in terms of fulfilling my plan? And how can I better fulfill my plan? And the council will answer those questions.
Beautiful, beautiful. Rob, we're just going to take some more questions that the audience had. People want to know if terminal illness is planned and why is it a source of growth for the soul. People get very devastated when they hear that they have cancer or any other illness. Why would a soul plan something like that?
Well, as I understand it, everybody plans multiple, what you could call exit points. The average person, as I understand it, has at least 2 or 3 pre-planned exit points. You would take an exit point under one of two sets of circumstances. One would be that you have completed your plan. You've done everything you came here to do, and you've learned everything you came here to learn, so it's time to go home. The other set of circumstances is actually the opposite of that. Your soul has concluded, for whatever reason, that you won't be able to fulfill your plan, or you won't be able to learn what you came to learn. And in that case, rather than waste time and energy, it's time to end the incarnation and then plan another one. So the fact that it's a terminal illness, as opposed to anything else that it could be, a lot of that has to do with the lessons for the family and friends of the person with the terminal illness. And it has to do with things like opening your heart, learning unconditional love, cultivating greater faith and trust in spirit, in life, in source, lessons like that.
Understood. Rob, you used a very interesting phrase, it's time to go home. But most people are extremely frightened of death. They don't look at that, the other dimension, as home. They feel that this is their home and death threatens it. What is your message for that?
Speaking from personal experience, I would encourage people to read books written by people who have had near-death experiences. I started reading a lot of those books when I was in my 30s. That was really what led initially to my spiritual awakening. And if you read those accounts, what you find is that there is nothing to be fearful of in death. It's actually a glorious celebration. In my books, there are channelings of an ascended master named Aaron. And somebody asked Aaron once, what is it like to die? And he said, well, imagine that somebody pushes your head underneath the water and you're underwater for a long period of time and you can't breathe. And then all of a sudden they let go of you and you spring to the surface and now I can breathe. It's like that. You feel like you can breathe again. And what he was referring to is that when you're confined to a physical body, it's actually very, very limiting. Whereas our true nature is to be unlimited and infinite and eternal as souls. But in order to have this kind of physical experience, we compress our energy into a physical body. We forget that we're actually unlimited beings on the other side.
Yeah, thanks. I've had a similar thought process and a channeling, but it makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. What about suicide? A lot of people say that, what is your view on, is suicide planned as part of the pre-birth contract, or is it an act of free will?
So in my second book, Your Soul's Gift, there's an entire chapter about the pre-birth planning of suicide. And we talked with Jesus at length in channeling sessions to understand this better. So I asked him at the beginning of the channeling session, is suicide planned before we're born? And he says it is never planned as a certainty, but it is planned as a possibility, a probability, or occasionally a probability so high as to be almost certain. Now, why would a soul do that? Well, the person who is the subject of that particular chapter, he had a number of past lives in which the lifetime ended with him having not processed certain energies like depression and anxiety. So those energies are still out there, they still exist, and they need him to process them. So in his pre-birth planning, he plans to carry back into body these unhealed energies of depression and anxiety for the purpose of healing them. And it's foreseen in his pre-birth planning session. His guides actually tell him, you're carrying so much back into body in the way of unhealed energies that a suicide is very, very likely. And he basically says, I'm willing to take that risk. This is something I really want to do. I want to try to heal all of this in one lifetime. And this is shocking from the level of the personality, but what you have to understand here is that when you plan a lifetime, when you're on the other side planning it, you realize that a lifetime is actually very brief. Nobody is permanently harmed by anything that happens here, and yet the wisdom becomes part of you literally for all eternity. So from that perspective, it actually does make sense that people would do things like plan to heal unhealed energies, even though there's a high probability of suicide.
That's a great explanation. Thank you. People also want to know about sudden deaths, which they perceive as sudden. I think you've already clarified it, but there's a question from the audience that why would a young mother leave 2 children and just suddenly she's hale and hearty and then she suddenly just goes away? So is there anything called a sudden death, or do you think it's an exit point that is planned? Even though, people in this dimension may not understand, maybe the soul has a different plan. How would you see this?
I would see that as an exit point that's planned. A lot of times souls plan very short lifetimes because they feel that whatever they want to do or whatever they want to learn, it doesn't require your 90 years on the plane. It can be done in far fewer years. And this is true even for children who die at a young age. Very often they are just testing out what the earth experience is like. Sometimes they're souls who haven't incarnated on earth before, and they just want to be here for a very short time to see what it's like. Now, the lessons for the parents who lose a child, generally it has to do with opening their heart, cultivating heart-based compassion, and so forth. This is very difficult to understand from the level of the personality. But again, when you're back on the other side, planning an incarnation, you know that this wisdom, this learning, this growth is going to become part of you for all eternity. And so it really is very much worthwhile from the soul's vantage point.
Great. There's another question that says that can a soul change its soul plan while on earth, or is it something that they plan and they sort of go through it, or can they also change it while they are on earth?
People change their pre-birth plans all the time. You can do it consciously simply by speaking aloud to God or Source and your spirit guides and your higher self and requesting whatever changes you want. But even if you don't do that, pre-birth plans get amended on a regular basis. And the way that happens, it occurs while we're asleep at night. When you're sleeping, you leave the body and you travel back to the other side in your spirit or astral body, and so do the other significant people in your life. You meet with them there, and you ask basically one question, which is, are we learning what we came to learn? If the answer to that question is yes, then carry on. But if the answer to that question is no, then you talk about what changes do you need to make to the pre-birth plan so that you can learn what you came here to learn. And in that way, pre-birth plans get changed all the time.
Thank you. Thank you for that, because we have a very similar thing that we do in the automatic writing workshop where we say this, but we wanted also your opinion on this, and really helps us. Rob, what would you think about domestic violence? It is not mentioned in your book. There's no chapter on domestic violence. People want to know that how come the free will of the abuser is sort of the destiny of the one who's getting, sort of, who feels that they are being abused. So what's your view on domestic violence? Or is it a lesson between them? The person who's feeling abused needs to have courage and, stand up for themselves. And this then is an opportunity for them to do so.
Well, there's an entire chapter about the pre-birth planning of abusive relationships in my second book, Your Soul's Gift. Now, the story there is not one of physical abuse, it's emotional, verbal abuse, but it's abuse nevertheless. So we worked with a medium who was able to hear the conversation that this woman had when she was planning her life. And she references an ancient past life, basically in caveman times, where her partner in this lifetime was her son, and she was the mother. And she wasn't able to protect the child, and the child was killed at a very young age. She carried a lot of guilt about that and wanted to make amends and do it right, so to speak. And so in her pre-birth planning, she agrees to be the partner of the soul who was her son in that old lifetime. Then her guide takes her aside and she says, this is a risky thing to do because he's taking back into body a lot of unhealed energies for the purpose of healing them. And what we foresee is that these unhealed energies are going to cause him to be emotionally abusive to you. And she essentially says, I'm willing to take that chance. And if it happens, I will work with it to foster my own spiritual growth. And then they talk about what to do if he's not able to heal. And the plan they put in place is that she'll be with him for a number of years and try to help him to heal these energies. But if he's not able or willing to do it, then the plan is for her to leave the relationship. And this is very important. The soul does plan to be temporarily in abusive relationships, but it never plans to be in them permanently. What everybody's soul eventually wants for them is a life of complete joy. And so if the partner is not able to successfully heal themselves, the plan calls to leave the relationship.
Yeah, thanks for that. A lot of people come to us, especially young mothers who are grieving a miscarriage, for example. People who, and then there are people who've had stillborn children, one after the other. So they wonder what is their life lesson.
There's an entire chapter about miscarriage, again, in my second book, Your Soul's Gift. And once more, it has to do with cultivating compassion, heart-based consciousness, unconditional love. There are a set of qualities that I refer to as divine virtues. These are qualities that are very important to the soul. And a lot of times the pre-birth planning of that kind of an experience is motivated by a desire to cultivate the virtues. So the virtues are things like unconditional love, empathy, patience, compassion, faith, trust, acceptance, and so on. If you think of miscarriage in terms of the divine virtues, which virtues could somebody cultivate through that experience? Well, faith and trust, compassion, those would be the main ones that come to mind immediately. Now, it doesn't always occur. Sometimes people are not able to cultivate the virtues as a result of these experiences. And when that happens, what generally occurs is that the same kind of challenge will come back around numerous times. And each time it returns, it comes back in an increasingly intense form. So if you have that kind of pattern in your life where the same kind of thing recurs, but it becomes more intense each time, that is your soul really trying to get your attention about something. And it's probably because you're not learning one of the virtues.
Yeah, makes sense. Absolutely makes sense. Rob, what about people who actively wish ill for others? What about people who constantly say and demonstrate acts of wanting harm to others. Of course, they seem very disconnected in their own heart chakra and they're disconnected from source. But why would someone do that?
Well, certainly it could be a free will decision on the part of the personality that was not planned before birth, or it could be part of a larger plan. People do plan to be mistreated by others. Again, it's very hard to grasp from the level of the personality, but when you're planning your life, you know that the lifetime is very brief, no one is permanently harmed, and yet the wisdom becomes part of you for all eternity. Those are the motivations for planning those kinds of challenges.
Okay. And whenever you have a question? Okay. If the abuser does not leave the healer, even if the soul of the healer decides to leave, what to do in this situation? Let's say one person is someone who's connected to light, and they are not able to get out of the situation of abuse. What would you recommend to them? How would they know their soul contract is over with this person?
It's generally something that people are able to sense intuitively. There's a feeling of completion, and there's a feeling of lack of resonance where previously there was a feeling of resonance. And I think this happens in many different kinds of relationships, not just ones in which one person is being abusive to another, but just in friendships, family relationships in general. There's a feeling of resonance with the other person while you're working on whatever it is you came here to work on. And once that work is complete, that feeling of resonance often dissipates completely. And then people will say things like, well, so-and-so and I just drifted apart. And they don't really understand what that means or why it happened. It's generally because you completed your work with that person.
Yeah, but at the level of the personality, it's very difficult to acknowledge. I think most people look for blame either on the other person or on the situation and try to, find some sort of a story around it, which is not important. So it's very well that you said that, people drift apart and maybe it's just the soul contract is just sort of done. I mean, there's peace. What if two people separate? There is no peace. Both people are feeling triggered all the time, thinking about the other person. Would you say that these souls have, through an act of free will, not chosen to work on whatever contract they had?
It could be that, or it could be that they're just better off working on it separately rather than together. So it could be that they attempted to learn certain lessons together, and for whatever reason, it just wasn't happening for one or both people. And then there's some kind of intervention by the spirit guides or the higher selves of those two people to bring them apart and put them in different sets of circumstances so that they can work on things individually. You can resolve your karma with another person without having to do any work directly with that person. Just through internal shifts of forgiveness and understanding and compassion, you can resolve all of the karma on your own without saying a single word to the other person.
Right. What's your view on soul groups having contracts? For example, when we had AIDS in this world, when we had things like, the whole soul group came and had a plan to sort of help people look at a different thing. Does this, sort of come in your channeling? Do you believe that souls together come and have a contract? And are we, according to you, was COVID part of a large group contract?
There are large group contracts. One example that I'm familiar with, you might remember a number of years ago, there was a tsunami that hit Southeast Asia, and about 100,000 people were killed in that. That has come up in the channeling sessions I've done for the books. And what Spirit explained to me is that those 100,000 souls, before they incarnated, they looked at the state of the earth and they said basically, we want the earth to be at a certain vibration by a certain point in linear time. And if it looks like the Earth is not going to get there, then we agree to give our lives in a large-scale natural disaster, because we know that the results of that disaster will be a worldwide outpouring of love and compassion by all the countries and all the peoples of the world. And that was exactly what happened. You had all of the governments of the world temporarily put aside their differences in order to coordinate and funnel aid into Southeast Asia. That outflow of aid to Southeast Asia raised the vibration of the entire planet significantly. So those souls accomplished exactly what they wanted to. From the level of the personality, it's of course a great tragedy. 100,000 people were killed. But from the level of our non-physical home, the level of the soul, what happened as a result of that tsunami was just an incredible blessing for all the people of the planet.
Would you look at COVID also like that?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Would you look at COVID also in a similar way?
That's a very interesting question. I have not done any research on COVID and pre-birth planning. It might very well fall into that same category. The other possibility is that there were some free will decisions made by certain people that were not agreed upon before birth in order to bring COVID into existence. If that's the case, then that's a very different kind of scenario.
Right, right. Rob, light workers across the world have started to, sort of join this whole consciousness around things, people leaving their corporate jobs and doing this. There's been a tremendous amount of interest and shift towards light and consciousness, especially since 2012. People still struggle because they look at spirituality or meditation or this kind of work as something that has to be done apart from their daily life. And we always take the message home that, we are who we are and everything is part of consciousness. What is your message to people who are actively seeking the light but are not really finding the time to connect with their spirit guides?
Well, for people who have very busy lives, maybe they're in the corporate world and they need to focus on that. The thing to understand and to keep in mind is that your vibration, your frequency, is the single most important thing in your life. It determines your entire experience, and it also is your primary form of service to the world. This is true for literally every person on the planet. Your vibration is far more helpful, far more impactful, far more important than any action you can ever take with your physical body. So if you're somebody who, for example, has a busy job in the corporate world, if you manage to keep your vibration high, even if you don't have time for a formal spiritual practice, that vibration will be infused into all the work that you do, and it radiates out physically from your physical body and affects literally every life form on the face of the planet. So again, that's your major form of service, much more important than any action you can ever take with your physical body.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Rob, people, sometimes get stuck between their views on spirit guides. They say that we were channeling our spirit guides, but we are not sure whether we are channeling our spirit guides or not. Any view on that?
Well, it's important to trust what comes to you. Trust is a purveyor of light. So if you want to hear your guides, you need to trust in your own ability to hear them, and then you need to trust what it is that you hear. And you can assess whether or not you're really talking to high vibrational non-physical beings by the feelings it generates for you. Try not to go into an intellectual analysis of what you're being told. Just ask yourself, what is it that these words cause me to feel? If it causes you to feel happiness, love, joy, peace, that's an indicator that you are really hearing your guides. If the words that you're hearing cause feelings of fear or anything else that lowers your vibration, that's an indication that either you're hearing the egoic portion of your own mind or you're hearing low vibration beings on the astral plane who do not have your best interests in heart, in which case it would be better just to ignore them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, Rob, a lot of people have a question around what is their life purpose. There are various views on this. Of course, some people say that our life purpose is only to, sort of fulfill the lessons that we have chosen before we took birth. Some people say that, life purpose is to do with things that relate to doing things for other people. Some people say that no, life purpose means just joy. I hear a lot of talk now across spiritual leaders to say, if you're in joy, your purpose is met. I'm sure all of these have relevance and they are true in their own ways, but we would love to hear from you. What is your view on life purpose?
My view is that every single person is here for essentially the same bottom line purpose, and that is we're all learning lessons in how to more freely and more fully give and receive love. There are many, many specific lessons we learn in the Earth School, and those vary quite a bit from person to person. But if you distill them down, they all have a common denominator. And the common denominator is that we're learning how to more freely and fully give and receive love.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I do agree. And I've spoken about it many times that it is about unconditional love. I think everyone speaks about it. And it is about, working with the heart chakra, opening ourselves to um, to love. Lot of people, when I work with inmates, having been in jail for many years, they feel that they are abandoned children of God and that, they are being punished. So their question to me is that, ma'am, if God loves us, why did we choose prison? Why could we have learned our lessons minus of being in prison? Or did we sort of mess it up with our free will? Was there a possibility that we could have learned this lesson without actually being in prison? What's your view on that?
I would say that for some of them, that's almost certainly true. And for others, that's almost certainly not true. There are probably large portions of a prison population that could not have learned the lessons any other way, and that's why it resulted in going to prison. Eckhart Tolle talks a little bit in his work about people who are in prison, and he makes a very interesting observation. He says that sometimes being in prison leads to a profound spiritual awakening, in that because it's such a miserable experience and the suffering is so great, it provides both the opportunity and the motivation for the person who's in prison to become very, very present, completely focused in the now moment. Now, that is a very difficult and painful way to cultivate presence, but it can also be a very powerful way to cultivate presence. And so there are some people who come out of a prison experience actually in a state of enlightenment because of that.
That's true. That's absolutely right. Do souls choose difficult countries, for example, where there is poverty or malnutrition or not enough hygienic facilities, as part of their learning? Do souls choose that as part of their circumstances to learn a certain lesson? Like, for example, someone is born in the US and versus someone who's born in a really poor country.
So there's an entire body of channel literature known as the Michael system. Michael here is not a reference to Archangel Michael. Michael here is a group consciousness, a collective, that has channeled a lot of information about pre-birth plans relative to soul age and soul archetype. And what Michael says is that there are 5 or 6 categories of soul age, the youngest of which is, I believe the term that's used is infant. So Michael says that infant souls who have not had a lot of incarnations on the earth plane, they are interested primarily in exploring issues of physical survival. And so they tend to incarnate in a place like Africa that lends itself to that kind of an exploration. That's the explanation that Michael gives.
Yes, we channel the same thing in Akashic Records, so it's lovely to have a reconfirmation of that. Rob, it's been an absolute pleasure, and we can go on and on. The audience is happy, and I've been, asking the questions that they've been asking. Thank you very, very much for joining us. And whenever you're in India, we'd love to host you and perhaps collaborate on a couple of workshops with you. Thank you very much. And
You're welcome.
We'll be in touch soon. Thank you for joining. Thank you, audience, for being so lovely, and thank you for asking your questions. That sort of helped us to bring more light and awareness towards topics that all of us think, but we don't know direct answers. And Rob has been kind enough to share his knowledge with all of you. So thank you for this session, and wishing you all the best for your new book.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.